All right, it's one thing to demo the width tool. It demos great because it looks like magic and stuff. However, it's another thing to get precise results out of it, especially when you're working with closed path outlines. And that's where things can get quite wonky. So in this movie, I'm going to show you a real-world application of the width tool, and I'll also show you how to create your own custom variable width profile. Here's the setup. Most fonts don't include an infinity symbol. So in addition to my digits 1 through 9, I wanted to create a matching infinity. So I'll go ahead and click on that guy to select him, and then I'll change his line weight to 16 points, and he matches. It's that simple. And that's because all these rounded numerals down here are uniform in terms of their line weight. But what if I'm trying to create an infinity symbol that matches Adobe Caslon, which is one of the almost all fonts out there that don't include infinity? Well, if I were trying to just fake it, I would create this guy right here, which is an 8 toppled over on its side. And you can see that it's an 8 because whereas the 9 is thicker in its vertical segments and thinner in its horizontal segments, the 8 is exactly the opposite. So it doesn't match. So my mission was to create an infinity symbol that does match. So I'll start with this guy right here, the second of the two infinity lines. And I'll change its line weight to 24 points, and that'll represent the maximum thickness of this line. Now I'll go ahead and switch over to the width tool here, and I'll drag at exactly one location, by the way, in order to create a width point that makes the stroke thinner at this location. And just by the virtue of the fact that I dragged at this one location, I end up creating 2 more width points, at least actually 2 more width points. There's actually 3. 2 of them are on top of each other, and then there's this guy right here. Well, he needs to get thinner, so I'll go ahead and drag those handles in. And then I'll click and drag right there in order to create a thicker point along the stroke, and I'll drag from here in order to create a thinner one, and I'll drag down here to create, oh, I've already got one at this location. And you can tell that Illustrator's create a width point for you if you start dragging and it doesn't change the handles, and rather dragging will move the width point to a different location. In which case, just go ahead and drag the handles, but you have to keep an eye out for this because this can really throw you later on. If you're just sort of happily working along, you get one of these where you got 2 width points right next to each other. And it's like, I don't want that. That's just going to cause problems later if I end up doing one of these numbers. So I'll go ahead and press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac. That guy's selected. I'll press the backspace key to get rid of it. But you can end up with like 30 width points where you thought you only had 6 or 7. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drag this guy out. This is another one that Illustrator kindly created for me. Here's where we get in trouble. Right now, I think this actually doesn't look that good. I might create a point right here. I'm actually having problems getting Illustrator to recognize where I want this width point. Right there's where I want it. And I want to thicken things up. But I also want to make this guy thinner. And if I start doing this number, I think I messed something up here, and then I do, oh boy, I've got no control. I don't know what I'm doing now. And now I'm making this guy thin and this guy remains thick. Well, here's why this is happening. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but what's happening is that there's a perceived endpoint, even on a closed path outline, when you're working with the width tool. So we have 2 width points that are right next to each other, and we can't delete either of them. We can move them to different locations, but if we start doing that, then we can manipulate them independently, and then we're going to run into even bigger problems. So what's the solution? Well, the width tool is just plain unpredictable when you're working with closed path outlines, but when you're working with open path outlines, it's a lot easier to figure out what you're doing. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to change this line right here to a variable width stroke that looks like the one just below it, and then we'll save that off as a variable width profile, and then we'll apply it to our infinity symbol. So here goes. For starters here, I'll go ahead and control-click or command-click on this line in order to select it, and I'll change its line weight value to 10 points. That's where we'll start. And then I'll go ahead and double-click right there in the center of the stroke like so in order to bring up the width point edit dialog box. And I'll just change the total width value to 24 points. By default, Illustrator will go ahead and equally distribute that value between the 2 handles, side 1 and side 2. So we've got 12 points apiece. And then I'll click OK. So in other words, everything's nice and symmetrical. All right, now let's create another point of thickness at this location right there. Double-click, change that line weight value to 24, press Tab, everything's good, click OK, and create another one right here. So I'm just eyeballing it, by the way. And I happen to know that this is the basic shape I'm looking for, the basic contour that is. And I know that because I puzzled around with my infinity symbol. I saved out a custom profile. I went ahead and applied it to this line, and then I picked it apart and made it better. But now I'm just showing you how you do it in the first place. Anyway, I'll click OK in order to accept that change. And then we want a thinner point right there, so we'll double click there and change the total width value to 10 points. Click OK. Let's create another one right there. Go ahead and change its total width value to 10 point. Click OK. And then we need a couple of more points here. We need one here. So double click at that location, change it to 10 points. So we're just going with 10 points and 24 points. That's it. Click OK. And then we want one right about here, it looks like. And I'll change it to 10 points. Now, we need more because notice we get this kind of flaring right there. And when these two flare points come together, they're going to create a kind of corner. So to even things out, double click at this location, change that to 10 points. We just want that to be as flat as possible. You could get fussy and set another point right there if you wanted to. Not sure it's worth it. I'm going to set a point there though, double click and change it to 10 points. And go ahead and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. And we've got the variable with stroke that we're looking for. Now, the great thing about this, you may have noticed, throughout this, I never dragged with the tool. I just double-clicked with the tool and entered numerical values. That way, I know exactly what I'm doing. And because we're working on a straight line with no curves whatsoever, Illustrator wasn't tempted to automatically generate a few width points for me. So everything is as predictable as it gets. All right, with this line selected, which I believe it is, I'll go ahead and switch to my black arrow tool, and I can see that it is selected. So I'll go up to the control panel and click on the variable with profile option. And you can see that it's actually showing me my custom profile so far, but we need to go ahead and save it out by clicking on the Add to Profiles button right there. And I'll name this guy 3 Humps because that's basically what he is, and click OK. All right. Now, thing to note about variable with profiles, unlike a lot of the stuff I've shown you, such as swatches, and we saved a selection in an earlier movie, those things are saved along with the document. Custom profiles are not, which is too bad, frankly. Instead, they're saved as an Illustrator preference setting. So I managed to make 3 humps. Go ahead and escape out there. And I'll scroll over to my horrible-looking infinity symbol. I'll click somewhere in the path outline to select it. I'll go up to the variable with profile option up here in the control panel, and I'll select 3 humps. And look at that. It looks pretty darn good. It could use some additional modifications, probably a little fine-tuning. But it looks so much better than anything I would have gotten were I to try to edit this shape directly. And I'll go ahead and zoom out here. It very closely matches the existing numerals associated with the font Adobe Caslon. And that's how you go about precisely controlling the behavior of the width tool, even when you're working with closed path outlines.